So when it comes to authenticating your services and APIs, there are a couple of ways of securing them. But in this video, we're going to implement auth to our application where we'll be able to authenticate the user from any existing provider, Google, GitHub, Discord, whatever really. So we are following the previous video where we have built a full stack application with Go and HTMX, but it was missing authentication. So what use really is an application without authentication, right? So on this video, we are going to follow from that work that we have already done and just focus on securing our API. Now, you don't really need any background on the project itself to learn and profit from this video, because I've made this specifically so you can get the value without watching the previous video. But if you're interested in developing with HTMX and Go, I'll leave the video in the description below. So before we start, I just want to show you this little diagram from Go. Basically, it explains some of the most used authentication methods. So here we have the basic authentication, token authentication, for example, the JWT, very used. Then we have OAuth, which is what we're going to be using. In theory, what's going to happen is that we are going to communicate with an external service that follows the OAuth protocol. And then we have API key authentication, which is pretty simple as well. But this is just an overview. So the reason that I have decided to go with OAuth, it's because it's easier to set up. We don't have to also implement the authentication nor manage it. And we are relying on established solutions that are secure. Now for the project stack, this is what we're going to be using. This is what we have already built on the previous video as well. So it's a God stack, Golang, Templ, and HTMX. And we're going to use a package called Goth as well. So it's going to be a lot of Goth in this video. So this is the package that we are going to be using. It's a very solid solution to implement authentication against a myriad of providers. So here we have all of the providers. So basically, whatever you want to implement, you can implement against it. It's pretty solid. So let me just show you the application that we're going to be building. The UI is nothing special, just because I want to focus on the features itself. So let me just clear here. And you notice that I get redirected to the authentication. So I cannot access this application without authentication. So I have here implemented two providers, Discord and GitHub. And let's click on the Discord. So I get redirected to the Discord authentication. I am authenticated in Discord, so everything works. And here I have on the navbar my username from Discord, my avatar, and all of that information, and I can see the application. By the way, talking about Discord, I'll leave in the description below the Discord community if you want to join, where you can post anything you want, questions, and join a community of like-minded people. I'll leave that in the description. So here I have the see available cars. If I click on it, I can see the whole application and I can do any functionality. So every endpoint here is authenticated. If I start searching for Miata, I can see and I get the results. If I'm not authenticated, for example, let me clear the cookies, I am going to have a problem. So I am redirected to login where I need to log in. Alright guys, so let's then get started. This is the boilerplate code that I'm starting from. If you're wondering, this is the GitHub repository that we're starting from, exact same. So if you want to follow along, do a clone of that repository, and then let's get started. And so the only thing that I have added here is that I have added this section here with these 4 endpoints that we're going to populate. Currently they have nil handlers and we are going to implement them. So the first one is the auth/provider, where we can pass in any provider, and we're going to start the authentication process. Then we have the callback, which is what the auth is going to call. So the provider, for example, the Discord provider, is going to call these endpoints, and then we are going to have some implementation in there. Also, we have the logout, of course, for any provider, so we can make sure that we are logging out of the session on the providers. And finally, we have here the view for the login, where we can actually have a selection of the providers where you can log in. So before starting, let's install the only package that we need for this project, which is the Goth from Mark Bates. Let's go to the console and paste it in and install it. After that, let's start by populating this handler so we can have an idea of what is going to happen. Let's create here a new file called auth.go from the package handlers. And let's start by creating the login view. So I think it's fair to start from there. So let's call this handle, and it's going to take in a response writer and the request. And if you don't recall, the handler, basically it's a service that receives a dependency, which is the storage, and the storage is what it communicates with the database, take for example a repository. So here on the login, what we do, and the only thing we do, is we go to the views and return the login view and render it with HTMX. So let's do a render, pass in the request context and the writer, and this is it. So whenever we hit /login, we should go to the login, the handler, the login. So this is then the login screen. So this login view is pretty simple. So if you watch the previous video, this is how we are building the UI with Templ and HTMX. We are wrapping this view with a page, and here we pass in files so we don't have the navigation bar. And what we do is just render two buttons, one for the Discord and one to the GitHub, where we're going to call the /auth Discord and GitHub provider, which is this endpoint here. So let's run the project and see if that works. So I'm gonna hit R to start in the live watching. It's started correctly. Let's then run the make Templ, which is gonna start watching for Templ changes. And then let's also create the Tailwind watcher. Let's go back to the browser, and here we have our application running. Let's hit this /login, and we should have our UI. Now this is not going to do anything right now. If you click, we get a 404 because we need to implement it ourselves first. So let's go ahead and implement the handler for the auth provider. So what starts the authentication process? Let's go ahead into the same file and create the handle provider login. And it's going to receive again the HTTP handle func. So the first thing we do on this function is that we're going to check if the user is already logged in. If it is, we can return to the home page, for example. Else we start the authentication process. So to do that, we can call the gothic.completeAuth function. So this does what it says. It returns a user and an error. And if the error is equal to nil, it means that the user is authenticated. And we can basically just log it so we can have some visibility. Else we can go to views.home.render and we pass in the context again. Else it's because the authentication process is not done, so we need to start it. So gothic.beginAuth handler, and this is basically what the handle provider login does. So let's hook this up to the endpoint on the main handler.begin provider login. So this starts, but first we need to set up the authentication service, and then we need to also set up the callback so we can have some functionality. So let's just start by doing the callback, and then it's going to make sense in a bit when we start the service with the providers, right? So the callback function is going to have the same functionality here as the complete user auth. So we can just copy this line here and paste it here, and basically we want the user and the error. Then we check if the error is different than nil, and here we can do basically you can just print to the browser an error. We can handle this better, but just for teaching purposes, I'm gonna keep this simple. After that, we just set in the header. Basically, we just redirecting the user to the slash, which is going to be the home page. So it's going to be location, and the location is going to be the slash. Then we also write in at the header http.redirect temporary, which is this one. Now we're not going to do anything with the user right now, so let me just print here the user. I'm just going to print the user first name, for example. If you want to check what properties you have, you can just go inside it. For example, complete auth, and here it returns the goth.use, and then let me hook up here on the main the callback function. So with that, we can actually start implementing and initializing the auth package with our providers. So let's go ahead and create here a new folder called services. And let's create a new folder again called auth. And I'm going to call auth.go. It's going to be from the package auth. And here we're going to have a service called authentication service. It's going to be just a struct with some methods in it. For now, it's going to be empty. And let's create a constructor as well so we can start it in the service in a good way. It's going to return a pointer to auth service. Then we go to auth.useProviders. And here we can list any providers that we want from the GitHub. So if you go here into the documentation, you can see all of these providers, and you can go inside examples, main.go. And here you have a list of all the providers and how you can implement all of them. I'm going to go with Discord for this example, but you can go with any providers that you want. So for Discord, I'm going to do discord.new. Now, this method here receives 3 key ingredients. So it's the client key, the secret, and the callback URL. So this is how you authenticate against your Discord implementation. So for example, if you want to do Discord, what you can do is go to Discord. I'm going to leave this link in the description, or you can go to Google and type in Discord OAuth, and you're going to be redirected to this page, or GitHub OAuth or Google OAuth. Every provider is going to have a different way of creating the credentials. For example, let's click on registering new application. Let's create a new application. I'm going to call this example. So this is how you do it for Discord. For any provider, is going to be pretty similar to this. So here I have my client ID and the secret, which you need to copy and paste them here on the new. But the correct way of doing this is, of course, putting them into environment variables, because these are sensitive informations that you don't want to share. So here on this project, we already have a way to communicate with environment variables on the config. What you do here is that we have this singleton here, this global variable that we can access the environment variables of the application whenever we want. So I'm going to call this the Discord client ID. It's going to be a string. And then we also have the Discord client secrets. Then here we need to populate on the init. So it's going to be Discord client ID, get env. I'm going to call this Discord client ID. And the default value is going to be empty, and the secret as well. So the way that I'm handling environment variables on this project is that I am injecting them into runtime. For that, I'm using a tool called dir-env. This is what I usually use on my videos. You can inject environment variables on the fly, and this is how you can do it on the cloud as well. So it's always ready to be used on the cloud. Here I have my env.rc file with these environment variables already. If you don't want to use dir-env, you can always use go.env, which is a pretty popular solution as well, where you can just create your .env file and load them from there. All you need to do is do changes here and to load them correctly how you want, right? So here on the authentication service, now that we have the environment variables correctly set up, let me just paste in those values from the config. This is how you access them. And here is the callback URL, which is going to be, actually, let's create a function for this. Let's call builds callback URL, because it's going to be pretty similar to all the providers. And this provider is the Discord. Let me create this function here. Let me just actually return the auth service, and here the build callback URL. It's going to receive a provider, and it's going to return a string as well. And this function, basically what it does is that it's going to return a URL in the form of the public host, the port /auth, the provider /callback. So this is going to be the URL that we have here on the main file. This is the one. And then we are getting these variables from the environment variables as well. So the public host, the port. So these are the default values, the HTTP localhost, 8080 port. This is what we are running our application. So if you wanted to add a new provider, you can just do discord.new and do the same exact thing. Discord, GitHub, for example, you can use Google And the process is going to be the same. The only thing is that you need to add a new environment variables, and you can get them from the provider documentation. So let's go back to the main.go and get a hold of the authentication service. So it's going to be inside the auth, new auth service, and let's send this to the handler. So the handler is going to receive a new dependency, the auth service. Let me just declare it here. It's going to be called just auth because we're going to access this a couple of times. Auth.service is going to be received here in a constructor as well, and just like so. So let me just save this, and I think it is working. Before we can test, we need to configure on the OAuth provider the callback URL. So for us, it's going to be the localhost 8080. So if you are running on a different host or port, don't forget to adjust that. It's going to be the Discord/callback. This is the endpoint that we have set up on the main. Let's just save. But before that, we also need to choose what informations we want to get from the user. So for example, I could get the identity and the email, why not? And then we need to select the redirect URL, which is the one that we have just created. So let's just save. So let me just restart the server. I go back to the application, refresh it. And you might be wondering why we are not redirected automatically to the /login page. That is because we need to implement that functionality, of course. What we're going to do in a bit is that we need some sort of middleware or a pre-handler for all of these handlers that we want to authenticate. And then if the user does not have a session, for example, in the cookies, we are going to redirect back to the login page. Else we just redirect to the handler, which renders the page. But first I want to test to see if the authentication is working. Then we can worry about that. So if you click on Discord, you should be redirected to the Discord login page. It's going to authenticate automatically because I already have an active session on Discord, and we should be redirected back to our application. So everything should be working, but let's check the logs and see if anything is out of the ordinary. So here I have the username log that we got from the callback. So we are sure that is working because we are getting the username information from Discord. And you might see some of these logs, and this is very important because no session environment is set. And what that means, so this is coming from Goth. What that means is that we need some sort of a storage session so we can have our user logged in into the server. So to fix that, let's go back to the service auth.go, and here on the constructor, we need to set in the gothic.store, and this needs to be set to an interface. So let me just do nil and import gothic. So this needs to be of the sessions.store implementation. So it needs to implement the get, the new, and the save. This is how we're gonna store the user session, but Gothic does not handle any of that. It just requires an implementation, so we need to pass one implementation. And the implementation that I have decided to go with is the Gorilla Sessions package. So we could build ourselves that. It's somewhat simple, but for learning purposes, and I really am a big fan of the Gorilla packages. This is one that I have used multiple times, and this is basically what we're gonna do when we create a session. So we can fetch a session, we can then set values and save it. Now to do that, let's do dependency injection. Of course, we're not just gonna start here an implementation. So let's do again a parameter as we should. So we go from sessions.store. So this is already from the Gorilla sessions. So make sure that we have that imported on the package and install it. So go get with this link. Then we just hook in the store here, like so. So this should not be a pointer here. Now on the main file, we have this error where we require a store. So let me just do a session store, and we need to create some sort of session store somehow. So let's go here to the services, auth. Let's create a new file called sessions.go. So this way we are decoupling the session storage from the authentication services. So the way that we're going to hold the session, there are a couple of ways, but I think the standard way, and one which is very easy to implement, which is cookies. So whenever we get the response from Discord, they are gonna send us a token, and we can store that token into the session browser of the user, and then we can validate that cookie against our authentication to see if the user has a session. So here I'm going to create the new cookie store implementation, and it's going to return as sessions.cookie store. And inside here, let's do a store and initialize the Gorilla sessions.new cookie store, like so. Here is going to receive a key pairs. You can pass in multiple or just one. Let me just continue with the flow, and I'm gonna explain what this is. So the store needs to have a max age for the cookies, which is going to be, again, a value. You can actually just start here with a configuration. I'm gonna call these session options. And these session options are going to be the cookies key. All of this is coming from the secrets. This is something that we should hold there as well. The max age, it's going to be an integer. We're going to have another one, it's going to be the HTTP only. And we also have the secure. I don't want to hard code any of this. So here I have added some description for these two properties, because they must be set to true if you are deploying this to production and serving this over HTTPS, which you should. Then we're going to receive these properties from the arguments. So this is the implementation for the cookie store. I just set these properties from the options, pretty simple. And then at the end, I return the store. Here we can now get a hold of auth new cookie store, and we pass in the options, which we can actually just initialize them from here. And again, this is how I'm gonna get access to them. So I'm going to the config.envs and access these properties that we just need to go ahead and create them. So here on the config, let's go ahead and populate this. I have added these 4 new properties. And now we need to initialize them here on the init config as well, like so. So here I am declaring two new functions, which is get env has an integer. I am handling my implementation for getting envs. So let's just add these two implementations real quick, because this one gets the env has a string, because the value here is a string, but we need to have these values as integers for the implementation. So here are the implementations, pretty straightforward. I'm just going to skip over them. Basically, we do the same thing, which is the lookup env, but then we convert this to an integer, and here the boolean as well, we pass as a boolean. And here we have the secrets. So here on the cookies auth, make sure that you are overriding this value here with the secure one, because I'm just using this default one. Add this one in the environment variables as well. Then here on the cookies auth age in seconds, basically we want to set the duration of the session cookie in seconds. So for example, let's do this for 2 days. So it's going to be 60 times 60 times 24. Then you choose the number of days that you want. So it's going to be 1 day, 2 days. For me, it's going to be 2 days. But I'm going to move this out. I'm going to start this into constants. I think it's easier to read. So 2 days in seconds. Then here on the top, I'm going to have this constant here. 2 days in seconds. Like so. Then I had just forgotten to add the cookies key here on the new cookie store. Then here on the main, this should not throw any errors. It should have everything configured here. We are passing in the session store inside the new auth service, setting up the store, and now we should have a cookie storage working. Let's try that out. So let's go ahead and hit the /login and do the whole process again. So it worked. Let's go back to the logs and see what's happening. So here we have the username and the other warnings have disappeared. So that is good progress. And if you check in the cookies, we still don't have any cookies set up. And that is because we need to manually set the cookies of the user session. And that is what we are going to do. So here on the callback provider, let's go to the method. And here where we log, we should actually set the user session as well. So we're going to have some sort of function here on the auth that is going to set that session. So let's go here on the user service auth and let's create that function. So I have called this method called store user session. It's part of the auth service. and it receives the response, the HTTP handler, and then the goth.user that we have here on the response from the authentication. Then we're going to basically go ahead into the Gorilla sessions and use these snippets that we have already seen. We're going to do some adjustments. Let me copy that and paste it here. Instead of being store, we're going to have access to the gothic.store, and we can get the session by session name. I'm going to store this into a variable. I think it's easier. So session name, I'm going to put it here, and it's going to be called, for example, user session. This is going to be the name of the cookie, like so. And here we can just paste it in. I'm going to remove the comments. We don't need them right now. And I'm going to return an error, like so. And at the end, I'm just going to return nil. Now, the values that we want to store, these of course are just for example purposes, but we want to store in the user, which is going to be equal to the user that we received on the parameter. So this is how we store the user session into the cookies. Now let's consume this inside the handle callback. Let's get access to the error. Auth service dot store user session. Here we pass in the handler and the user, and we just handle the error. If error is different than nil, we print it or something else, and then we save this file, and we should have the session stored. So let's try again that. Let's go here to the car show, login. And now let's take a look here at the cookies, and here we have the user session stored in. So we can have here the name, and if you take a look at the time, this is the time that we have set it into the max age time. So it's going to be into 2 days. So there are just two things missing, which is having here on the nav bar the user, or the logged in user information, and then having our endpoints secured, because even if I'm not logged in, if I clear my cookies, I can still make requests here on the application, which is not good. That is the reason why we are adding authentication in the first place. So here on the authentication service, let's create a new method called require auth. And required auth is going to receive two parameters. The first one is going to be an HTTP handler func, so the endpoint handler, and then the store for the auth service, so that we can access the cookies from this method. And then we're going to handle and just return the handle func. So here we just return a function. This is going to be a higher order function. And inside the function, the first thing that we need to do is get the current user session. And if there is no current user session, then we just redirect back to the login. So let's do that. So let's get session and an error. And here we can access the auth service. And right now we don't have any functionality to do that, but let's call this, for example, get user session. And here we pass in the requests, because we need to access the cookies. So let's just go ahead and create this function here. So this function is going to be very simple as well. So it first receives the request and returns a goth user if there is one, otherwise it's going to return an error. So the first thing we do is we go to the Gothic store as is seen, we go to the session name. If there is nothing, we just return an empty Gothic user, and here we get a hold of the user that we stored. And if there is nothing here as well, for some reason, we return an error. Otherwise, we just return the user. Here, let me just handle the error. And this is pretty important, because if we have an error, we need to redirect the user back to the login. So let me just have here a login. Then we redirect the user to the /login with the temporary redirect status. And we just return out of this function, because there is nothing else we can do. If everything works, if there is a session, we can log the session. For example, here I'm logging the session.name with the user is authenticated, just like we did the callback. And at the end, we just call the handler func with the request and response, like so. Now to consume this, we just go back to the main and wrap the handlers with this function, but we need to remove this. So this is not a method, not going to be a service method. I don't think it makes sense. So we can just remove this and make this a function from this package. And here on the main, we need to wrap all of these with the correct auth.require authentication, like this. like that, and then we pass in the auth service, and that should be done for all of the cars service. So all of these endpoints are now authenticated, require authentication. And if we go back to the application, let's try again and see if we are redirected back. So we cannot access anymore the application without the session. Here on the cookies we don't have anything, but if we go to the Discord and log in again, we should be able to access the rest of the application. And here on the cookies we have a session, and we can do whatever we want here. We can search for cars, delete cars, you can do all of that good stuff. But if we delete the cookies and refresh, we are redirected back to the /login. So this is the logs that we just got here from the application running. And the last thing that we want to do is show that we are currently logged in on the application navigation bar. So here on the page temple, what I have done here is that I am now receiving a new parameter. It's going to be the got user. And then if there is that information, that user information, I return a logout button, the welcome message, and then here the image that you saw at the beginning. This is going to be the image from the GitHub or whatever provider you have. And then here on the other Templ files, I'm also updating them because they require the page. So I have to be sending in the user. So because we have just updated the Templ files, we also need to update the handlers. So for example, here on the auth, we have this error where the home requires now a user. So let's pass in the user that's coming from the complete auth, that it was not doing anything there. So now it is. On the cars, it is a little bit different, but we can get the user very easily from the auth handler here. So get current session, very easy, pass in the request, and we get in the user. We get an error. I'm going to ignore it just to move a little bit faster, and we pass in the user. So very easy. How easy is this? And it's going to be the same for the home. Pass in the user like so, and now we have all the errors fixed. So let's do just one more final test to see if everything is working. Let's log in with Discord. And now we should be able to be at the application where we have our information here updated. So guys, this is how you secure your Golang APIs and services. And if you like this video, if it was helpful, consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribing, and join the Discord community on the description below.